call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order on the 20th of November at 7 p.m. We'll take roll call. Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Mr. Van Truen?
Here.
Mr. Dembinski?
Here.
Mr. Cowger? Mr. Winarski?
Here.
And the chair is present. We have two people who are absent, Council President Dietrich and Mr. Cowger. They both have letters on file. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to accept this, move to excuse. Wow. Mr. Dietrich and Mr. Calgar, they have letters on file.
Thank you. Mr. Winarski.
I'll second.
A motion and a second to excuse Mr. Dietrich and Mr. Cowger. They both have letters on file. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Mr. Cowger and Mr. Dietrich are excused. We have 5 items on the agenda. And we will begin with A 17-61, and just for Mr. Ramsey's information, A 17-51 will be last on the agenda. All right. A 17-61, which is reappropriate funds for various accounts in the Treasurer's Office. The accounts are 100-7005-52, 130 bank charges $2,000. That's from that account to 1000-7005-52304 contracts and professional services, again $2,000 transferred to that account. That was submitted by Mr. Kukuka, Auditor Kukuka. Do you have comments?
Yeah, this was to cover the $4,000 for the legal, to join that legal group that the treasurer wanted to do, and the account number that he had put down that was used didn't have enough funds in it, so this is to make up, we just need an additional $2,000. And we are looking for the emergency on that.
Comments or questions? Mr. Dembinski.
Mr. Ramsey.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ramsey, I'm sorry.
No problem, thank you. Yeah, apparently we wrote down the wrong account number under ordinance number 017-41. Under section 2, it had the wrong account number, but it also appears that this one is also indicating the wrong account number again. So it should be 205-7015-52304.
So it's from that one, 100-2005.
No, it should be, the from account is correct, the to account
It should be,
205-7015, 52304.
okay, read it again. Read it again. This is the to account.
Yes.
Okay,
205-7015,
Yes. Yes.
and the last 5 are the same.
Yes.
will you please give it to me one more time, the whole thing?
I'll sign it
Yes, thank you very much.
to 205
205
7015,
7015
and then the last 5 will be the same.
52304. Okay, Mr. Law Director, do we need to amend this?
Well, the mayor just pointed out the prior legislation has the 100 account in it.
The one that's.
But I imagine that's what we're trying to change, if I'm not mistaken. I'm wondering if we
You're
maybe,
reappropriating funds, but
Right.
the legislation still says 100 account.
right, so I think we should probably do an amended ordinance to reflect that. I think we need to do a new ordinance to reflect that the money should be coming from the 200 account.
Okay.
Well, I guess what I want to know from the mayor's office is, I mean, you pointed this out, I imagine this is incorrect.
I don't know, but the legislation, he's asking to reappropriate funds in the 205 account, but the legislation says it needs to be paid in the 100
Right,
account.
yeah.
I assume it's already been paid, so I don't know which.
Oh, well then we need to do some, I guess, accounting.
It has to be back into the 100-700552304, but it would need to come from, okay, I apologize, you guys.
This is right,
This is correct, yeah, the mayor's correct, this is correct. I was reading a note on what the account was originally supposed to be from, I apologize.
So this is Stet.
The legislation is correct.
Ignore everything that I said for the preceding 5 minutes.
So the legislation, are you good, Mr. Kukuka? Okay. All right, okay.
You know.
Thank you both for agreeing. All right, very good. Any comments or questions from the legislative body? Mr. Dembinski.
Move to send A 1761 to the floor of council with the emergency.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second to take A 17-61 to the floor of council with the emergency. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. A 17-61 goes to the floor of council with the emergency. Okay, thank you very much. The next item I have is A 17-62, which is the 2018 interim budget and declaring an emergency, and the information is as attached. This was submitted by Mayor Costello. Mr. Mayor, would you care to comment?
Thanks. I guess this could have been submitted by the mayor and the auditor's office because we worked together on this. So the auditor's office starts, they prepare a lot of this. A lot of these items you'll notice are less than last year's interim budget, but we only need it to be in use for the first few months of the year. So a lot of the math was around 60%, and not much changes from last year till this year. Other than some of those items that were full line items are only partial this year. So I'll entertain any questions that you might have, and if the auditors would like to add anything. I think just ready for questions.
Okay. Comments or questions? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kukuka, is this the right number? No, I'm just too easy of a question?
They're all right. Don't pick on
No, I just. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things. Is there anything coming up in the first 3 months that, because I always ask about major ups and downs in the interim from one year to the next, and I do appreciate the auditor who puts that there, who lets, instead of me having to go back to my notes and try to dig it up, he puts the interim from the last year. I usually look a couple back and try to see if we see a trend. But is there anything in the first 3 months that's that you could point me to, and then I can just refrain from the rest of my questions, or
Nothing
do you want
that
to
I
go
would-
line item? Are we pretty good? I'm seeing a lot of utility costs down, but even at 60% of the budget, does that mean that we're going to have a lower? Because usually that's what we did last year, right? 60% is what you generally would go with.
Most of them were full items. I mean, almost all of last year's interim budget except payroll was full years in the interim. So you're going to see some reductions in utility costs, some capital outlay, some things that I don't plan on spending till the end of the year. We went ahead and reduced it in this interim budget, so we've got a better handle on what money's available next year.
I see some reductions in the utilities across the board, utilities and gas and water.
Again, we reduced that by somewhere around 60%
Okay.
because we only need utilities the first 3 months
So
of the
this
year.
is one of them, and that would be the reason why it'll probably return back to about the budgeted
Exactly.
amount. The other thing, Now, whether it was 60 or not, we should be seeing a reduction due to our new phone system coming in, right? A reduction in phone costs.
We should.
And so that's reflected here as well.
Not
hoping?
not really. I mean, I reduced it from the full year's budget, and it will probably be even reduced more.
Oh,
when
fantastic.
maybe not from the interim budget, but it won't be the same as last year's full budget. We're kind of waiting to see where those prices come in for our service. We're not quite finished on the analyzing those things.
And I appreciate your efforts this past year in getting a lot of that IT up and running, which is going to cut a lot of our costs, and we're going to see savings. So I'm noticing, I'm getting excited to see some of that reflected in the budget, and I'm commending you for your efforts on that. Outside of that, I don't see much different. I did have a couple that I noticed. The fire, do we have another vehicle coming that we have a fire apparatus of 100 grand more?
There'll be a couple fire truck purchases, more or less the standard size vehicles, I believe, like a Suburban or a pickup truck that will first responder type vehicle.
Did we already
So-
purchase that command new vehicle, or is that something on the?
It's in the works. It's being
Okay.
purchased, and then parts and stuff will be put on it. But it's being purchased locally, and then it'll be sent to somebody to take some of the equipment off the old one, and we'll have to purchase some new equipment.
Fantastic. Very good. That I believe, one moment here, electric department, you had a very large line material.
Well, that's because of the change, the way the state auditor wants us to do some things. We typically bought a lot of our line material through capital outlay, so they wanted to see more things bought through the line material. It's looked at a little bit differently because that new capital outlay ordinance that we actually worked on this year.
All right, very good. Outside of that, I didn't see anything else that sticks out. We'll see how the regular budget comes in. Thank you very much for your time to answer the questions.
Thank you.
The work you're doing on it. Thank you, Mr. Auditor, as well. I know your office puts a lot of work in this as well. No more. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Winarski.
Thank you, Madam President. Went through the list here. Last year, we introduced a new department, our IT department, but I don't see a budget here for them. Is that something in the works, or what direction we
They're still
had?
in the cable technology account. I'd like to see that department in operation a little bit longer before I start throwing darts at how much it's gonna cost. So I think if I get a couple more months under that department's belt, we'll have a lot better idea. So I will work with the auditor. I know there'll be we'll have to develop some account numbers. But I do plan on doing a more specific line item for that in the final budget.
Okay, so any expense, that'd be salaries, if they have to buy a firewall or something, I don't know, whatever you IT people talk about. But that'll be in that line item that's in the cable account.
That's going to be somewhat creative. I mean, there's such a thing as an overhead allocation where we take money from all the different departments, figuring out how much of it's going to be used accordingly. So some of those items still could come from the individual departments if one of those departments are the one that's going to use it. So that's another part of the creativeness of how this department's going to work, is figuring out where all those monies are going to come from. So we're still working on that. But hopefully a lot of that will be there, but some of it still will be. If the utilities department needs a server that's solely going to be used by the utility department, it'll still probably be funded by the utility department.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and I'm excited about having the new IT department. I guess with it being so new, I'm also very interested. What does it truly cost to have an IT department? And I realize any IT needs have come directly out of the department, but we also have large infrastructure projects. And I'd just like to understand what IT truly costs in the city. So if there's anything we could do where I could identify it, I'm not sure what the process is, but I would like to learn by the end of the year, what's it cost?
We'll have that in there. We'll always just have to remember too, where that, it's going to cost money, but, the IT department will probably save us money, help us with efficiency. So even though it's going to cost us money, it's going to be worth every penny of it.
I don't argue that at all.
All right.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winarski. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Miller?
Move to take this item to the floor of council with emergency.
Mr. Dubinsky?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to take A 17-62 to the floor of council with the emergency. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. A 17-62 to the floor of council with the emergency. The third item I have on the agenda is A 17-63. The subject is authorization allowing the Safety Services Director to award the contract for sludge removal services for the Water Pollution Control Center, and the amount is in $95,000. Account number is 610-5004-52304. Mr. Jeffries, you submitted this request on behalf of yourself and Superintendent Brailer from the Water Pollution Control Center. Would you care to comment?
Yes, real quickly, thank you, Madam Chair, appreciate that. This is just one of the typical functions, things that we have to do in the Water Pollution Control Department is sludge removal. So you've seen this come across your desks in the past, so we appreciate your support on this one. Thank you.
Is this an annual requirement?
Is that annual, Mayor, or is that, I think it's annual.
We bid that annually. We've thought about putting in, sometimes that you could extend the contract, but typically we do this annually. And there's been some significant increases predicted, so we went ahead and bid it first, and our inclinations were correct that it was a significant increase over last year. So now we at least know what it's going to cost rather than trying to guess that when we came and asked you to approve it.
Do you need the emergency on this?
Just so it's passed by the end of the year.
Okay.
So that's the most important part,
All
because
right.
this will need to take effect.
Okay,
So I would, yes,
it could be
please.
either the emergency or suspension of rules next week.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a preference?
Nope.
Okay,
Council's choice there.
okay.
We have 3 meetings, don't we still?
You can suspend, what we can do procedurally is, next week we can suspend rules and pass it on the first reading, and then it will take place 30 days after that, which will get it before the end of the year. If we put the emergency on it, we can go 2 readings and have it. So it's really your pleasure, gentlemen. Either one of those alternatives will allow us to have sludge disposal services beginning January 1.
Taking up to time, yes, I have morning.
Mr. Janik.
I'd like to move to take A-17-63 to the floor of council, please.
Okay. There's a motion to take it to the floor of council. Mr. Van Truen,
Second.
this is without the emergency, which means it will have, pardon? Was there a question?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? In order for this to, if we're going to send it without the emergency, then we just suspend rules next Monday, and it's not a problem. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0, and A 17-63 is taken to the floor of council. The next item I have is A 17-64. That's increase appropriation in various accounts as listed as following, and declaring an emergency, and it is to increase appropriations into account 204-3002-52121, which is PERS and Medicare, increase it by the amount of $50, and account 710-506-52123, which is health insurance claims, increase that by $50,000 also. The information is to provide for current expenses under health claims and PERS and Medicare for the year ending December 31st, 2017, and that was submitted by the auditor. Mr. Auditor, would you care to comment?
Yeah, we've had quite a few claims as far as healthcare wise. So we're actually running short in that one fund, and then for the Medicare, that is just a small amount that needs to be bumped up a little bit by $50. But yeah, the health insurance is the biggest one that we just have seen this year.
Mr. Dembinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for my own knowledge, I feel like when we've been doing this before, we reappropriate funds, as this is just an increase in appropriations. Where does the money come from?
From that account, within that fund, we move it from,
Here's a balance.
yeah,
It's just not been appropriated in the
Right.
past, so we move it from the balance.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay.
And
That's
so
actually-
it's from unappropriated
yeah.
funds.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ben, okay. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Van Truin.
Move to send this legislation to the floor council with the emergency.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to send A 17-64 to the floor of council with the emergency. Are there any comments, further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. The A 17-64 goes to the floor of council with the emergency. Right, the last item I have is A 17-51, and that is amendments to Amherst codified ordinances, AOC 192.18 and 192.29 as mandated by ORC 718.08. C1D and 718.27 C1B. Mr. Ramsey, you submitted this. Would you care to comment?
Yes, thank you. I apologize for I feel terribly about wasting everyone's time. So I'm okay with taking the joke, Mr. Miller. You got account number joke.
Having some fun with my mind.
This is something that we tried to hold off on doing. Everyone recalls we're retaining a law firm known as Frost Brown to challenge House Bill 49 and basically House Bill 5 from preceding years, which deal with sort of the major changes that they're doing to municipal income tax. Well, as it turns out, we're going to need to at least do these changes now in order that we cover our bases. Because if we don't have it passed by the first of the year, then it's possible the state could withhold some funds from us or impede our ability to levy a tax. So in order to be on the safe side, my recommendation is that we pass this, but if we're successful with the lawsuit, then these changes may be undone in the future. So it would not need, it'd be either or, similar to the previous legislation. It would have to be, these changes have to be implemented before the first of the year. So it doesn't need an emergency if you're able to pass it on one reading. And that's that.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I'm disappointed with the Ohio Assembly for their efforts on behalf of the ORC changes and what they're doing to our local treasurer's department, our ability to collect and administer taxes. I think this is only the beginning. I do appreciate our treasurer, Mr. Ramsey, in the office that he represents all the work they do. keep fighting. I think you did a fantastic job. If you get your MERS mixed up, that's minor in comparison to the thankfulness we are for the fight you put out there and to keep things local. So thank you for your efforts, and I appreciate them. And with that, I'd be glad to send this on. With emergency, Mr. Treasurer, or do you want us to suspend council rules? What's the recommendation from the office?
Why don't we go with suspending rules, that way there is the 30-day period in the event someone wants to communicate with the city.
Fair enough. Okay, so, go ahead and move to take A17-51 to the floor of council as it reflects.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to take A17-51 to the floor of council. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. That's A17-51 goes to the floor of council next meeting. That's all I have. Mr. Miller.
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. We are adjourned at 7:27. Thank you very much, gentlemen.